see, how far back do we want to go? um, Actually, Kathy and I were talking a little bit before we got a few minutes before here. I actually recently did a podcast with a local investor, DeMonte Hester. He has a new podcast called The Buckeye Investor. So if you really want to go deep into my backstory, you can check that out. But I'm primarily a buy and hold investor here in Columbus right now. We currently are pretty heavily focused on some transactional deals like wholesaling and rehab. But my I had a lot of odd jobs leading up to getting into real estate. My sort of professional background is in commercial facilities maintenance. So I've been sort of fixing things for quite some time, and a lot of different random things. So I've had some jobs doing like hotel maintenance, and worked as a bowling machine mechanic for a while, and most recently for the last maybe 8 years or so, I've been in the zipline industry, doing some maintenance and like structural inspections and that kind of work, construction. So that's been pretty interesting. That's taken me a lot of places. But as of right now, as of pretty recently, full-time in real estate. So that's been pretty exciting to kind of make that transition. Yeah, like I said, in the last couple meetings here, you guys have talked about the first 2 or 3 F's of this game. But yeah, so tonight I think we'll talk a little bit about fixing. Right now, well, I guess a little bit more about kind of where our business now. So my partner, Harvey Yergin, and I own a Home Investors franchise, and we sort of do all of our deals out of that business called Simple Solutions Real Estate. Like I said, we're kind of primarily focused on buy and hold rental properties, although we've really spent a lot of time in the first year or so focusing on some transactional stuff like wholesaling and rehabbing to kind of try and build some capital, create a little salary for ourselves, and then here at the end of the year, moving into the future, kind of transitioning into heavy buy and hold. So we're primarily focused right now on sort of marketing to and acquiring like distressed single family houses. I know, given the intruders from the last session, I know Kathy's got, I think, a lot of folks on mute. So maybe towards the end here, if we have questions and things, we can maybe have a little Q&A session towards the end.
Yeah, jot down your questions. If you have a note tablet or something close by, jot down your questions, because I know if you're like me, by the time you get to the end of the presentation, you've forgotten a question you wanted to ask toward the beginning. So make a note of those, and then we'll go through questions when Josh is all finished.
Yeah, that's perfect. Couple just, I guess, general sort of disclaimers, but like I've spoken with the group before about fixing. I by no means consider myself an expert at this. I think rehabbing real property is sort of, I think, is a lifelong development skill. It's just there's always a new issue or process or whatever that needs to be developed and overcome. But we right now have we have 3 active rehabs going on. And I recently was doing some project management for another local investor. So like in the last 30 days or so, I've been managing anywhere from 3 to 8 rehabs at a time. So definitely seen some stuff over the last year and trying to build out some processes and such to make it easier, if you will. I think the other thing that doesn't necessarily get talked about enough right now is, given the current market, I think there's a lot of people who are rehabbing property right now, and it's pretty easy to look smart as a rehab right now because um, the the sales price for your comps over the last 6 months or so have just been steadily climbing. Well, longer than that, but and right now houses in Columbus inventory is very low. Houses are selling very fast. If they're rehabbed appropriately and priced right, and we're selling a lot of things, going into contract in hours and selling over asking price. Um, so now is kind of, I think, is an easy time to be a rehabber. There's also an abundance of money. Um, Not as many deals available, but a lot of the other pieces are pretty easy to put together. So it's kind of easy now. So I think it's, I try to keep my focus on that. Um, when the market does eventually turn, I think that's kind of the real test of the rehabbing that you've been doing. If you've been doing it right or not, I think people will come to find in the near future. Um, and then Kathy and I also talked about, I'll talk about some documents here this evening, and I'm happy to share those with folks afterwards. I can send them over to Kathy, and she can send them out to the list. So if you guys want to take a look at some of the documents we talked about tonight, we can just reach out to Kathy and can get those sent out. As far as some of those documents go, another kind of disclaimer: I'm not an attorney or a CPA or any of those things. So if you're using like legal documents, I just recommend have an attorney take a look at them or whatever it is. But we do have some contracts and things that we use with our contractors. We haven't really had to lean on yet, but just things that we have in place in case we ever need to fall back on those. So as far as like fixing, I'll try my best to kind of stay out of the weeds, but we'll try to do like kind of a 30,000 foot overview of the rehabbing process. And we could go, there's 100 different directions we could go with this, but we'll try to keep it kind of high level. There are, I think one thing that people get caught up in sometimes, there are some nuanced differences between like rehabbing rental properties versus flipping houses, and some of those things can even be market dependent. But for tonight, we'll kind of just assume rehabbing in general. We won't really dive into each one or the other. So we can go ahead and dive into it, I guess. One of the most important things for us in the rehab process we've found is our scope of work. So if you're not familiar with the scope of work, it's basically a document that we create before the first hammer is swung in the house, and sort of just line item listing out every single repair that's going to need to be done in the home. So sometimes, actually, we have one project going on right now where the scope of work is just one single page. It's about a $15,000 rehab. It's one page. It's not very involved. We have another project coming up that we should start on Saturday, and that scope of work will likely be several pages. And that particular project, I would still consider mostly cosmetic. So if you were to get into like, a full gut rehab, or getting like architectural stuff, design, those sort of things, you could have a pretty lengthy scope of work. But the scope of work is really important to us. It's a document that helps get everybody on the same page. So I really like being able to reference the scope of work. When questions come up, we can look back at the scope and kind of, refer to it. If contractors have questions, they can go back and refer to it. The idea being basically I want to create a scope of work that I can hand to a contractor and show back up in 90 days and everything's done the way you want it. That's not super realistic, but that's kind of the idea. Is we try to detail it out to that level so that there's just no discrepancy on what needs to happen in the home. And that'll be one of the documents that I can share with you, like a real basic scope of work. So there's three major components in our scope. So we have exterior, interior, and then miscellaneous. So exterior components, things like roof, gutters, siding, if we're going to do any exterior painting, decks, maybe any detached building garages or sheds, those kind of things, landscaping. And then, interior components, the demolition, plumbing, electrical, HVAC, painting, we list out the color scheme that we're using, cabinets, countertops, flooring, that sort of stuff. And then miscellaneous is one that changes a lot, but it could be permits, or maybe if there's things like mold. Occasionally we need to do some extermination, maybe bugs or whatever it is, and just kind of other miscellaneous things that don't really fit in anywhere in particular. I think building your first scope of work is sometimes kind of the hardest one, but now we've kind of gotten in a rhythm now where we basically just copy and paste the last scope of work. A lot of the components, especially when you look at, especially in the interior, oftentimes a lot of our interior components are the same on every scope of work. Any house that we do, we're probably going to paint 100% of the interior, just different things like that, like re-devicing. So we're always going to put switches and outlets in every house. Smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, those are non-negotiable. Those are going in every property. So some of those kind of things, if you just kind of copy and paste, those get to stick around. And then the interior components and the miscellaneous, those are the ones that are really changing. Maybe you need to do the roof, maybe you don't. Mechanicals can be in any various state of repair. Like I mentioned, we try to do the scope of work. Actually, a lot of times we try to build out a scope of work before we buy the house. That's like step one for us. As soon as we can, we try to get a scope of work lined out, and it just gives everybody a good picture of what's going on with the project. And then sort of phase two, once the scope of work is built out, we use that to build out our budget. So again, like I said, sometimes even when we're still in the contract phase before we've actually even purchased the house, we have a scope and we can start getting contractor estimates and different things like that. So we'll start building out our budget. I know budget is one that's really hard for a lot of folks. Unfortunately, I don't really have a great solution on how to nail budgets, but if you have a good scope of work, it will really help you in the budget process. Getting a lot of different quotes and being able to kind of keep track of those really helps. A couple other things in the kind of the budget process, we usually, when we're budgeting for a rehab, we try to be very conservative. We're not in the business of losing money, so we try to be very conservative about our estimates. Even if we know, or if we're pretty confident we get some work done for a certain amount, we might just pad it a little bit. I like to kind of hide some money in the budget in random places. The other thing that we like to do in our budgets is we kind of use a formula for age contingency. So if we're buying a house that was built in 1990, we don't really hide any money in the age contingency. But if we're buying a house, like actually the one right now that we're working on, one in Clintonville, was built in 1898. So we stuck like a few $1,000s in age contingency because when you're working on houses that old, there's just weird things that cost more money. I don't know what they are, but they exist. And then I know another one that's pretty common is a lot of folks will just do, like, once you calculate your actual rehab budget, a lot of times people will just do a 10% contingency, just because there are things that you forget. You forget to count your light fixtures, or you forget some materials or whatever it is. So we usually just put in about a 10% contingency. And honestly, I think the biggest mistake that gets made in the budget step is just underestimating. It's so easy to underestimate a deal or a rehab, especially right now when it's hard to find deals. So you do find a deal and the price is a little bit higher than you want, and you kind of talk yourself into a $15,000 rehab when it's really probably like a 20. So just making sure people aren't underestimating the rehabs and trying to hide some contingencies in there, it definitely can help. We look at a lot of deals, like wholesale deals and things, and you see all the time somebody will say it's a $5,000 rehab, and it's like, well, it's probably not. We see deals all the time where they say it's $5,000 or $10,000 rehab, and I walk through the house and I think it's 25 or 30. Now, granted, there are people, like I said, I'm not the most experienced person, so there are people in this business who are doing rehabs for 2/3 or less the cost that I am, just because of maybe they have volume discounts from distributors, or they just have a contractor that they've built a really good working relationship with, or whatever it is. So, but again, just kind of making sure that people are keeping some money hidden in the budget will save you a lot of trouble. After kind of that budget step, the other really powerful lever in rehabbing is the schedule. So one thing that we found recently is we're spending a lot of time right now really trying to focus on making our rehabs efficient. I know it's kind of cliche, but time is money. So the longer, these projects are going on for us, we're spending more money. We're borrowing private money to finance our projects. So that has a daily, interest that's accruing. And then not to mention too, just opportunity costs. So if we have a significant amount of capital tied up in a deal, our goal is to get that money out of that deal and back into another one. So we spend, working on, that's probably the big thing we're working on right now, is trying to advance our schedules. So scheduling is kind of broke out into 3 sections, or I guess it's 4 sections. We have immediate concerns, rough work, unfinished work, and finished work. So for instance, the project we're starting on Saturday, the very first thing that's going to be happening there is a trash out. The house is full, like literally full of stuff. So very first thing we're going to do is get that cleaned out. That's an immediate concern. We can't really even get good eyes on the rehab and kind of finalizing the scope until we get all the stuff out of the way. The other thing that's kind of included in that is and then sort of moving on to the second phase, which is rough work. So on that particular project, we'll be doing a roof. So I'm hopeful first thing next week, we have the new roof going on. So that's going to go on very first. if we're going to start painting and fixing drywall and things in the house, we need to get a new lid on it first. And then unfinished work is sort of like maybe decks and porches or the drywall, some of the carpentry work, insulation, any of that type of stuff. And then finished work goes into, interior paint, the cabinets, countertops, finished electrical like outlets and switches and fixtures, and then, finished cleaning, the shower head and the faucets and then appliances, things like that. The schedules, I always find the schedule really interesting because these rehabs go very fast in the beginning and very slow at the end. So like scheduling for a trash out doesn't take that much effort because you basically tell whoever's doing it, everything in the house comes out. That's a pretty straightforward procedure. But when you get into the finish work, that's where you often need more skilled labor, and timelines can get a little tight there at the end. I feel like every rehab I've done, there's always like an extra week at the end, and just like punch out type stuff, just little random things that come up that maybe somebody missed, or you have, touch up paint where one guy came in to fix something else and messed up the trim. So then the painter needs to come back and kind of touch up, or, whatever it is. So schedule is really important though, because if you leave the schedule up to your contractors, they will likely be completing another project on somebody else's schedule. So we try to pin down in the very beginning a target completion date. In the case of we're using a general contractor, usually I will ask them what their opinion is on the target completion date. If they tell me, they can do the job in 3 weeks, we'll make the target completion date about 4 weeks, maybe 5. And then we put that in writing. And so everybody who's involved in the project is kind of aware of that target completion date. So that kind of helps, just gives everybody a beacon to work towards. And then kind of target completion dates throughout too. So if there's specific things, or subcontractors that we're working with, like HVAC or whatever it is, we might make them aware of our ultimate target completion date. But like we have a house that we're working on right now that needs some ductwork installed. But once the ductwork is done, it needs drywall and finishing. So just telling the HVAC contractor that the target completion date is, say, the 15th, is not really enough, because actually his target completion date is going to be about 2 weeks prior, so that we can still then get drywall and paint and those sort of things in behind him. Let's see, what else is schedule? Other, I guess, like scheduling tips is, like I said, these projects normally go very fast in the beginning, kind of on their own, but that's something that we really do try to encourage. So we schedule a lot of people to start, in the first week. We try to just get as much momentum into the project as we can. Projects I think are just a lot more enjoyable when they kind of start to go back together. You're able to kind of start to see the vision of the finished project. So some of that rough, messy demolition and that type of stuff, we try to just get as much forward momentum as we can, and knowing that we're going to spend some more time at the end just trying to get there sooner. And we schedule things. We try to be very specific with all the contractors, whoever it is, scheduling today. So we want to schedule the day that they're going to be there, the day that they're going to finish. We oftentimes have folks that work with who say, yeah, I can be there sometime in the next 2 weeks. And it's like, well, that's, if you allow somebody to show up in the next 2 weeks, it'll be like in probably 15 days. They'll be there. So we try to just be really specific about that stuff. The other thing that we kind of tend to lean towards on scheduling stuff is we really like to work outside in, especially if we're rehabbing for resale. We try to get a lot of the exterior stuff type done. That kind of just like helps the whole community and kind of builds some interest for your property and those types of things. All right, now we get to the fun contractors. So the other big part of fixing, at least if you're not planning on fixing yourself, which is an option. I know a lot of people do kind of their own rehabs, but I do think you get to a point like where you're doing multiple projects at a time, it's just not feasible to do them yourself. So we do work with a lot of different contractors, and finding good contractors is like a full-time job, but they do exist. There are, I would say, are significant more unqualified contractors, especially in a really hot real estate market like we have right now. When there's as many projects going on as there are here in Columbus right now, you'll see a lot of kind of lower level contractors or like handymen who will move themselves up in the ranks and become general contractors. And those are not necessarily the people you want to be working with. There's kind of an array of different types of contractors. So you have like general contractors who are kind of jack of all trades or who can manage a lot of different subcontractors. You have specialty contractors like, HVAC people or electricians. And then, you have handymen or kind of like freelance workers who are like hourly. So, you can do a rehab with any of those types of people. You can have a handyman rehab a whole house for you, but not every handyman is going to be able to do all of those things. So it's just kind of a matter of finding the right people for what you need. Oftentimes, if you find a good general contractor, they're going to know all of the subcontractors who they might bring in to help with the project, although, general contractor is going to cost a little bit more money than, a handyman. So there's kind of pros and cons of dealing with all of those different people. The way that we found to find contractors recently is just referrals. There's all these Facebook groups and things going on right now. If you can find a contractor that has worked with somebody before, it saves a lot of headache and kind of negotiating. Now, that's not an end-all, be-all solution, but it definitely gets you over a couple hurdles to begin with. You also have to watch out. There are contractors who are kind of what I call like investor friendly, and then there are contractors who specialize in people's primary residences. We actually have a project right now in Clintonville that I kind of pegged as about a $5,000 rehab in labor. So this is just labor costs, not material. We got 4 different quotes, and they were ranging anywhere from $3,800 to, I believe, $12,000. So, just kind of, I guess the best thing there is kind of just getting multiple quotes. The other thing to keep in mind with contractors too is whether they're licensed, bonded, and insured. Some people require that. Some people don't care. Um, it's kind of I guess a personal preference, but there are oftentimes projects. If you're replacing a roof on a house, you need to be pulling a permit. So there are a lot of roofers in Columbus who do not pull permits. um, so kind of navigating some of that stuff as well. Um, and then a couple of those things kind of combined. So one document that we use and that I can kind of share with you guys is what we call an independent contractor agreement. So once we build out a scope of work, a budget, and a schedule, and we get quotes from and hire a contractor, we're going to put all that information together in what we call the independent contractor agreement. That's definitely like a legally binding document, and it's an agreement between us and our contractor of all of the terms and possible scenarios regarding that project. So it has the full scope of work, so there's no confusion about what needs to be done. It has the timeline, it has all of those things, and they're signing off on that saying, I agree to all of these. The other thing that goes in there is the terms of the payment. So whether we're going to pay them some type of deposit, or if we're paying them every Friday for X amount, or if we're paying them based on milestones in the project. All of that stuff is lined out in our independent contractor agreement. Also, alongside that document, when we get that document filled out before contractors start, we try to get W-9s from them. So the cost of the rehab, that's an expense to our company, so we're going to be writing that off. We need a W-9 to do that. If you don't get a W-9 from a contractor and you pay them their final check, it's much harder to get the W-9, so we try to get those up front as soon as we can while there's still some money on the table. That seems to be encouraging to folks. And I think I mentioned it a minute ago, but getting 3 bids is probably, in dealing with contractors, getting multiple quotes is probably the best thing you can do, especially if you don't have a ton of knowledge on how much these things cost. Because like I said earlier, you can get quotes. We had quotes ranging from $4,000 to $12,000 in labor. And I think we actually ended up on that particular project, we ended up going with a guy at about $6,000. So the cheapest one is not always the best one also, but if you get multiple quotes, you can usually get a pretty good feel of who you want to work with. Let's see, some other documents. I think there's a couple other things that I can send over to Kathy. Some walkthrough checklist. Those can really help, and especially those help on both going through the initial rehab or building out your scope of work. I kind of have a checklist that you can work off of. And I can send over the scope of work. And kind of going back to the scope and just trying to figure out rehabs. I know a lot of people, I talk with a lot of newer investors, and they spend a lot of time kind of concerned about things that maybe don't necessarily matter as much. Like, painting a house is not very expensive. Even a big house you can get painted for relatively cheap. So when you're looking at a house, if you're new and you're not sure exactly what you're looking for, just make sure that you look at stuff that's going to be expensive. When we go into a house, actually a lot of times now I go into a house, I'm going to go to the basement. I go to the basement first. Let's just go straight to the basement. That's where the expensive stuff is. We're going to make sure the walls are straight and check the mechanicals. That's kind of the big expense items. Paint and floor and some of those things are, probably not going to wreck your budget. But if you buy a house thinking that you're just going to be doing paint and flooring and then it ends up needing a lot of foundation work, that's where folks can get really caught up in those kind of things. I think that's kind of my high-level overview of our fixing process. I don't know if anybody has any questions, or if you guys want to, Kathy, if you want to maybe do a little Q&A.
I will. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the chat room on. And if you have any questions, just say yes in the chat, and then I can turn you on for those of you that aren't on yet. And to get us started, how did you first find your first contractors? I mean, on your very first one, we've got some newbies in the group, and that's always a concern is how do we vet those contractors and know that we have someone that we can trust, because sometimes this is a lot of money for a first timer.
Yeah, well, our very first the very first purchase that we made, my wife and I, was a 4-unit, and we actually ended up kind of self-rehabbing that entire building ourselves. So that was kind of the first one. And then our second one is actually one of our favorite contractors. Was just a referral from another investor, was a guy that they had done some work with in the past. And he now actually is like our favorite contractor. He's not the fastest, and he kind of is a 1 or 2, maybe 3-man crew at times. But he's a really good worker. And the nice thing about him is we know exactly what product we get when he works on a house, and we don't really have to go, check on him a lot and those kinds of things. So he actually has a project ending here in the next 30 days or so. So we're actually like actively looking for a house to buy specifically for him, just to kind of keep him busy. But yeah, that was just a referral. So like I said, if you can get referrals, contractor referrals are really hard to get right now, because people keep their contractors close because good ones are hard to find. But if you can get a referral, that's a great place to start.
Perfect. Anybody else have any questions? Can anyone see the chat box? We're doing something kind of new. I just want to make sure that I turned it on. I want to make sure that folks can see that, or that you can chat in the chat box. Yeah, our materials getting hard to come by. This is from Chris. Let me unmute you, Chris. I ask you to unmute there. Can you click open? There you go.
Yes, thank you.
And I'm going to actually, you can even start your video if you want. You don't have to. That's up to you.
Okay, no, that's okay. I'm shy. No, I know that I have been trying to get wood to replace pieces of my deck, and I have been, I think it's been since late June or mid-July that I was trying, and somebody told me don't even bother looking until after Labor Day.
Yeah. Hi, Chris. How are you?
Hi, good.
Yeah, materials are kind of a mess right now. I think it's getting worse. We're seeing back orders on appliances is a big one right now. We ordered a set of appliances several weeks ago for a house, and they're still like 7 to 10 days out. And yeah, so appliances is one. Cabinets, we've had some kind of long lead times with cabinets. And I know that probably the worst one right now is, and I think you just mentioned it, is lumber. A lot of like pressure treated lumber there's just a shortage. I know I was talking to our fence guy yesterday. He was saying that they've been watching some lumber deliveries come into places like Home Depot, and orders, in the multiple thousands of boards, and then just getting like cleaned out in a single day.
Yeah, I can believe it.
Yeah. So even somebody like him who has connections with sort of like lumber distributors, they're having trouble getting certain things, and just kind of longer lead time. So yeah, and then also kind of along those same lines, material costs also just went up. I don't really have any data to back that up, but I think I saw somebody posted recently that like the cost of a 2x4 like tripled.
Wow.
So, if you're doing a small decking project or something like that, it's not a huge problem. But if you're talking about reframing a whole house, or if you're doing, several of these projects a month, those increased costs are not super fun. So, hopefully, I feel like I think it's a supply chain issue in most cases. Hopefully, since like a lot of folks are back to work, and I think manufacturing and things have kind of fired back up, hopefully that'll straighten back out in the near future. But at this point, it kind of seems to be trending down.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, our next question is from Tammy and David, and we'll get you guys unmuted there.
Sure. So nice to meet you, Josh.
Hey.
Just curious, you said, so we are some of the newbies that Kathy talked about, just buying our first properties. We actually have a couple in contract right now. And you mentioned with a lot of your SOWs, you're pretty much to a copy and paste point at this point. So I was just kind of wondering, with every property, what are you finding that you're always needing to do?
Yeah, there's definitely a handful of things that we're always working on. I think I maybe mentioned a couple of them earlier, but offhand, like we always redevice. So switches and outlets, that's one that is on every scope of work, unless by chance all of the switches and outlets are white and clean. But usually the houses that we're buying, they're not. So that's one, and people just like to see that consistency. And then kind of there's a lot of safety and like mechanical things too, like I have a standard line item in every scope of work that says all electrical connections should be in a proper junction box and covered appropriately. I don't know what it is about junction boxes. Like, it seems like every house we buy has like these weird electrical connections. But that's one of those things that if you don't catch it on the front end, it's going to come up in an action report on the back end. So that's a standard for us. We always like check the attic. Most of those weird electrical connections tend to be in the attic. And they're not like, it's not an expensive fix. If there's 3 electrical connections that need to go in a junction box, like, that's, a few $100s to get that squared away. And so that's one. And then like another safety thing is we'll always do like smoke and carbon monoxide detectors to code. If you don't put in smoke detectors, the inspector on the sales side is going to flag it, and you're going to end up putting them in anyway. So you might as well just do that one up front. Yeah, those are a couple of things. That's all I can really think of off the top of my head.
Okay, we have another question from Coffee. There you go. Can you unmute yourself? Perfect.
Hi. Thank you, Kathy. I heard him talk about taking the W-2 from the contractor. I just wanted him to talk more about it. I currently have a contractor working on a rehab for me right now. And I'm glad he's saying all that. I missed a few steps that he mentioned, but I have the knowledge now. And we had an agreement and then we signed, but I didn't really do a thorough agreement. But I think in the next future I'll do that. But what I wanted to know is more about the W-9 that he spoke about. What about it, and how do I get it?
He wants the very beginning pieces of getting that W-9 out to the contractor. What does that mean for you, Josh?
Yeah, so the W-9 is a standard tax document that you can just download from the IRS. And I'll include it with the documents that I send over to Kathy so she can send it out as well. But yeah, you can just download that right off the IRS website. Basically, the W-9 is just a document that when you write off the cost that you're paying your contractor, when you write that off of your taxes, they want to know if you're not paying for it, who is. So that's just basically the contact sheet for your contractor so that the IRS can follow up with them because they will be paying the taxes on that since you are not. But yeah, that's a standard IRS document. And the only real tip I have for that is just have the contractor sign it as soon as possible. Even if you're mid-project, that's fine. Just make sure they sign it before they get that final check, because we've had at least one contractor that I can remember for sure. We had a really good HVAC guy. He was really cheap, and he did a couple projects for us, and then at the end of our first year, we needed to write off that expense, so we tried to get a W-9, and I have never talked to the guy since. So, which is unfortunate on many levels because he was a really solid HVAC guy, but apparently he wasn't interested in being taxed. And that's probably partially our fault too. We probably should have had that conversation with him sooner. But yeah, so I would just say as soon as you can, try to get that W-9 filled out, and then that way you just have the information that you need for whoever's handling your taxes.
I'll just add a little bit to that. I had a couple of contractors that were friends that came as referrals, and I used them and did not get a W-9. And so then at tax time, when I wanted to deduct it as an expense for myself, again, didn't get the W-9 in time. And I actually got a letter from the IRS that said if I wasn't going to get a W-9, that I had to do withholding on that contractor and like an employee if I didn't get the W-9. So like Josh, I get it right up front these days. So Ryan had his hand up. Ryan, I'm going to unmute you.
Hey, Josh. Nice to meet you, man. And thanks for coming on and speaking tonight. You got a lot of good content there. I had a question. It's maybe like kind of a two-part question about materials. I'm an investor, and I also do handyman work on the side, and I do a lot of I buy a lot of materials. I buy a lot of them from Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, and I'm wondering if if there's certain things that are worth going to other places for. I know that I read somewhere recently where going to Lowe's to buy trim is not a good idea because it's maybe of lower quality, and they can make it a better quality at a regular mill, somewhere like that. Or if like HVAC things and plumbing is better to go to a local supply house rather than to go to Lowe's or Home Depot.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Materials materials overall is kind of a struggle for me right now, and um, my focus right now though is in efficiency and kind of the best use of my time. So my answer to your question is I try to buy as many materials as I can from the Home Depot. Um, we've had some issues with Lowe's. We are nearing the time frame when we can set up a Home Depot Pro account. So we're trying to basically buy everything from Home Depot. That's just the time efficiency thing. I haven't tried it. It's cheaper. Well, not everything from Home Depot. So again, for the sake of like efficiency, we have a lady that we work with who we order all of our flooring from. She not only has good pricing, although right now maybe it's about Home Depot, but I can order flooring from her by text messaging her. That is very easy for me, and I don't really have to think about it. I just tell her how much we use, and they deliver it. It's like a pretty straightforward procedure. Same thing with paint. We have a really good paint rep at Sherwin-Williams out in Canal Winchester. He does all of our paint. It's just easy. I don't have to like. I don't need. I just tell him what size the house is, and he tells he gets the right amount of paint, those sort of things. So it's for me from the materials thing. It's we focus on kind of efficiency, and once I get everything efficient, I do want to go back in and double check and make sure that we're not. I don't want to be easily ordering flooring that costs twice as much as it does somewhere else. But if all considered, if the prices are relative, I'm going to do whatever is the most efficient. But and then I think some of the specialty stuff probably does make sense. Like if you're buying a furnace or an air conditioner, that's a pretty high price item. That's probably worth shopping around a little bit. Or same thing like with appliances. I like appliances that are easy to order, but at the same time, if you can save several $100s and you're doing even 1 month or whatever it is, that amount of money. We have somebody that we have recently been getting all of our cabinets from, but I think their prices are kind of trending upwards, and they may not be the most competitive in pricing now. So that's one thing that we're kind of starting to look into. But with a lot of those things, it can also compare apples to apples. So in the cabinet, for instance, we check with a different supplier of cabinets to compare pricing, but they carry a different brand of cabinets. And then maybe the one person is an extra $500 for a set of cabinets, but they get them just 2 weeks earlier. Well, that to me is worth $500. And some of those things can be kind of hard to compare, but ultimately I try to decide with efficiency and speed.
Do you buy all of your materials for all of your projects, or do you ever have your contractor bring in their own materials?
Yeah, that's another one we're struggling with right now. We originally, it kind of depends on the contractor, but I think for most people, the easiest way to kind of break that down is your contractor should probably be picking up like builder grade materials, so lumber, drywall, screws, those types of things. They probably have a bigger truck than you anyway. So they, those kinds of things, they know how to pick out a good 2x4, and it's going to be covered by drywall anyway, so it doesn't really matter which one they get. But so I try to have the contractors picking out builder grade material, and then you as the owner or investor, you want to pick out finished materials like light fixtures, faucets, paint colors, flooring, that type of stuff. Contractors are not designers. Of course, neither am I, but if you want to be picking out your paint colors, they don't, wind up with foam color house or, something weird. But that kind of seems to be the delineation between material selecting.
Cool. Thanks, man.
What I've done, Josh, is the more rentals that I have in my portfolio, I've kind of gotten a system in place where I do all the same appliances, I do all the same faucets, I do all the same light fixtures. I kind of have my go-to. I even have it down into a parts list with the actual part number, so I can just give it to my contractor and say, here's what I need. And so oftentimes, because they are a contractor and they deal a lot with either Home Depot or Lowe's or wherever they like to deal, oftentimes they can just call that in with those part numbers and it's just ready for them to pick up. And so that really simplifies everything.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the way to do it. Yeah, this to be standardized as much as you can. Yeah, that's for sure the way to do it.
Stephanie has a question for us. Stephanie, can you, is your mic working? Are you good now? I don't hear you. Nope, she's not. She's off of mute, but we don't hear her. Her question, she said, something is a tad odd with my speaker or mic. However, in a fix, overall thoughts on permitting, how to decide and why, and the benefit of, plus what are the approximate cost? I'm not sure what.
Oh, of permitting?
Permitting, yes. On permitting,
Yeah.
yes. Thoughts on permitting and how to decide and why and the benefit of permitting. And then what is the actual cost of permits?
Great question. I want to be completely honest, do not have a lot of experience with permitting. We, up until this point, have not really done significant rehabs that have required a lot of permits. We've done some roofs. Those, per the city, require a permit. But generally, if you have a licensed roofer, they will handle the permit, and if you tell them in the beginning, they will include the cost of the permit into their quote. Some of the other stuff seems to be, there's some other things that require permits that some people do or do not pull permits for. I honestly don't know a lot of the nuance of permitting. We have a project coming up that will be getting all new windows in. That will be permitted because it's supposed to be. It's also very obvious when you take out from the street level, it's very obvious when you take all the windows of a house and put all new ones in. Somebody in charge of permitting happens to be in the neighborhood. They can, at a quick glance, see that you're doing work that should be permitted. In the other kind of stuff that gets into permitting, if you're doing like major electrical work or some of the HVAC type work, I think a lot of that stuff should be permitted. If you have a licensed contractor, they'll know much more about permits than I do, and hopefully will be pulling those on your behalf. But there are some things that you would think maybe need permitted, but don't. I think if you're doing HVAC work, like if you're replacing an air conditioner, for instance, if you're just replacing the existing one, I don't believe you need a permit. But if you're putting in an air conditioning that didn't exist before, that does require a permit. So there's some nuance to that for sure. As far as permit costs, I think like you're looking maybe, I think a roof permit might be like $100. And then a for like a full rehab project for a general kind of construction permit, I don't know, maybe $600, $800. I don't think, ultimately, I don't think permits cost a lot of money. I think that the issue that people oftentimes run into with permits is kind of a lead time. So if you're getting permitted work, you need to have inspections, and maybe your inspection gets scheduled out a few days. So your project kind of get held up and those sorts of things. But yeah, I would, if you have specific project questions about permits, I would definitely consult with somebody who knows more than myself.
Just a little bit additional information on that. The permit cost is actually to pay for your inspections. And the inspections are to relieve not only you of the liability of what you're doing, but it's to also relieve the city or jurisdiction that you're in of their liability. So for example, let's say, you have the local handyman, wire your house, and he's not licensed, so he doesn't pull any permits, and so there's no inspections. And then later there's a fire, and the cause of it is because of some bad wiring, and it can go back to not having it put in correctly. Then all of a sudden you're liable. Then of course, if somebody dies in the fire, then the lawsuit is like, well, why did the city let them do that? And so the whole purpose of the permits, for those of you that are new, is so that the city can do their inspections to make sure that everything is done according to code. And the code is all in the Ohio Revised Code. It's all written out. Anyone can see it. Anyone can look it up. Anyone can Google it and get a copy of the Ohio Revised Code. And then each city or ordinance, whether you're in a county or a township, they can have some variations of those codes that they've applied for. So that's why you have to always check on where the house is located as to what the actual code is for that particular location. But that's what the permits are for, is for all of those inspections, just to keep everybody safe. But what it does is, as an owner, it keeps you safe as well. It takes care of some of your liability as well.
Yeah, and there have been a few stories that I've heard recently of investors doing unpermitted work or buying houses with unpermitted work done, and the city has had full rehab projects undone to go back and meet those permit requirements. So if you hang a bunch of drywall and they come in and say that your electric work is not permitted, the drywall is coming back out and you're going to start over. So yeah, that's definitely an area, if you need to permit, you'll want to look into that for sure.
And I'm kind of a by the book gal anyway, so I always err on the side of getting the permit. I sold insurance years ago, so that's probably part of my demise, is that I know what the insurance companies are looking for as well. Okay, it is 7:08, so we're a little past an hour. Does anyone else have any question? Just either give me a hand up or type in the chat that just you have a question, and I'll get you connected here to Josh. So I'll keep my eye there on the chat if somebody jumps in there. But Josh, I have one question for you. Has nothing to do with fixing, but how in the heck did you get involved in zip lining?
Yeah. Actually, so there's a zipline canopy tour here in Columbus called Zip Zone, zipzonetours.com. They opened up here in late 2012. I actually just saw an ad in the newspaper to become a zipline guide. So I went and worked for them one season as a guide, and then I ended up working with them up until this year, just earlier this year. But then just kind of my background as being in construction and maintenance and stuff, I kind of took on a maintenance role there. And then that led into me doing construction on zipline tours all over the country, quite a bit of traveling and doing structural inspections and that type of stuff. So yeah, just started it out as a guide.
Interesting. Interesting. I love it. I love it. Okay. How many have been zip lining before? Yeah. Come on. Yeah. Okay. Good, good, good. Oh, Ryan says no. Okay. Any other questions, comments, anything? Stephanie, do you have anything else? I know your mic's not working there. We heard you, I think, when you first came on. I don't know what happened. She's all good. Okay. We've got Andorra. Haven't heard from Andorra. Do you have anything, Andorra? And we didn't hear from Julia.
No questions on my end.
Okay.
I would like to get some references that.
Go ahead, Andorra.
Oh, I would like to get some references that he was mentioning, Josh was mentioning, as far as, let's see, his flooring person, his cabinet person. So that would be nice to have.
Josh, how close to your heart are you holding that contractor list?
There's a contractor list. One is not. Yeah, I've got. I would say easiest way to handle that, probably curious about if you're looking for something specific. Just reach out to me, like the cabinet guy. I'm happy to share his information. Honestly, most people, we've got good enough relationships with the people that we work with. I don't mind sharing their information. Yeah, if you're, but for me I don't necessarily have all of that information in one place. So I would say if you're looking for something specific, feel free to reach out to me. I don't know if Kathy, if you'll send out an email, maybe it has my contact information in it.
I'll do that. I'll do that.
If you guys are on Instagram, you can message me there as well at Josh Hively. But I'm also everywhere else, Facebook. You can message me, you'll get through.
You can see on the screen his name's there in the corner, Joshua Hively, and that's how he'll show up. So, okay, anyone else? We haven't heard from Sue or Adrian. Give me a little thumbs up or a hands up or something in the chat box and I'll unmute you. Okay, it looks like we're all good. Josh, thank you so much. Oh, Ryan, do you have your hand up, Ryan? Maybe that was from earlier. Did you have your hand up, Ryan?
No, not this time. Must have been from earlier.
Okay, that was from earlier. Okay. Okay, with that, I'm going to say thank you so much for coming on, Josh. This has been very helpful. I've taken a lot of notes. I know I've learned something. I'm sure everyone has. And I am recording this, so I will upload the recording probably tomorrow sometime and get it out to everyone. And I'll include your contact information, Josh, and then send those documents over to me, and I'll have those available as well. So
thanks for having me.
Yes. So thank you, everyone, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.